Hey guys, welcome to Brian's Man Cave. So today I'm going to do kind of like a comparison video. I just want to show off two different versions of Pac-Man that started off on the older systems. And so I'm going to choose obviously the Atari 2600, which is a classic system in itself, and my favorite system, the Intellivision. Now, I've done a bunch of these comparison videos before, and I always like to show off how the same game looks on multiple systems. But this game I thought was a little bit different because Pac-Man is one of those legendary games, one of those legendary characters. He's pretty much the poster child for video game, as well, mainly retro gaming. I mean, they put Pac-Man on everything. I mean, I got a mug that has Pac-Man. I got the keychains that play little Pac-Man games. You know, even this guy that does like a three-dimensional kind of Pac-Man thing, and it's a keychain. Plus they have all those little mini-cades. I mean, Pac-Man was it. I mean, in the 80s, everybody knew who Pac-Man was. Today, he's still, you know, he's around. They still make a TV show on him, which I'm not too crazy of. You know, you still see him. He's just not as prominent as a lot of the other game, you know, Mario and all that other stuff. But anyways, I just wanted to show how the original Pac-Mans were played and looked on the older systems that we would have started with. And I just chose Atari and Intellivision. I'm aware that they're on a lot of other systems, but these are the two that I got familiar with, well, the systems anyways. And one of them I played, and that would be this one, the Pac-Man on the 2600, back in the time when this stuff was still sold on the shelf. And this one is a more recent one that I never even knew existed. And I was quite shocked when I found out that there was a Pac-Man game on the Intellivision. And when I tried it out, I was also shocked on how well it was. So let's just take a look and just kind of compare and see how they operate and how they play and how they look. Okay, so let's start off with Pac-Man on the Atari 2600. Now this one's kind of notorious for being awful. A lot of people will look at it and be like, this is not Pac-Man, or maybe back in the day they bought this game and were kind of disappointed. And with somewhat good reason. Obviously, it doesn't match what the arcade is. Now, when I was a kid, I didn't play a lot of Pac-Man games. I didn't have a lot of Pac-Man games. Even when I went to the arcades, I didn't really play Pac-Man too often. I stuck to games like Donkey Kong and you know, a few of the games like that, but I didn't always gravitate towards the Pac-Man games. Maybe Miss Pac-Man or Super Pac-Man or something like that. But so when I actually got a chance to play this game, a friend gave it to me a very long time ago, and I never really thought different of it. I mean, it felt like Pac-Man to me. You're a circle going around eating other, well, in this case, they're kind of square-shaped. But that's, you know, that's typical Atari, the blocky graphics. I've noticed that in a lot of Atari games, the older Atari games, they didn't have a lot of circular shape. But, you know, I always got by on that. I didn't mind that I was eating more like chiclets instead of dots. But otherwise, I mean, I always felt this game was actually not bad, I mean, for what it is. The sound effects, obviously that sound is not the Pac-Man sound. And, you know, the way Pac-Man eats the dots. Now, another thing is, like, we know programmers can actually build a Pac-Man game on the Atari 2600 with the limitations of today. Or they could build it today with the limitations that they would have had in the past. But, at the same time, a lot of the programmers really were on these short deadlines. They had to get these things on the shelf in time to meet market demand. I mean, there was a lot going against them at the same time. They didn't have the resources and the time that the homebrews today, you know, they have the experience, they know the full, what the Atari can do, what the Atari can't do. So we can't really hold that against them. And you'll notice, like, the maze, obviously, is not the original Pac-Man maze. There's a lot missing. But the reasoning for it is if you were to draw a line down the middle, you would notice that this side is exactly mirroring this side. And that was just a trick that they did in the Atari days to save programming space. You know, they just had to program one side and then just kind of duplicate the code or whatever they had to do and just mirror it. And you'll notice that in a lot of older classic Atari games that you could see how the one side and the other side are almost identical, if not identical. Like maybe they might be able to change something. But overall, I mean, yeah, the ghosts is another problem. Most people don't even realize that the ghosts are a different color, and that's because they blink a lot. And there's a reasoning for that as well. It's just the way that the scan lines are working. But you can kind of see that they are colored sometimes. You can see the yellow. You could see almost like a pink or blue. Overall, I mean, it's not that bad. As bad as some people will claim to be. It's kind of like the whole E.T. thing, you know. People just assume it's a bad game, so they just jump on the, you know, everybody else says it's a bad game, so it's a bad game. And when I played this as a kid, I really didn't have any problems with it. I mean, it was Pac-Man to me. Alright, now we have Pac-Man on the Intellivision, which is really strange because I'm staring at the Atari logo. You know, big, bright Atari logo. It says 1983 Atari. You don't see Intellivision anywhere. But I mean, in all fairness, this was Atari making the game to work on the Intellivision system. So they didn't want to sit there and splash a television anywhere. They wanted Atari. And it's Pac-Man. But, you know, overall, decent title. Much different than what you'd expect on most Intellivision games, where they started off with just the Intellivision title. And, you know, very boring looking. So let's get this one going. Okay, clearly you could see this one graphically beats the Atari version. It's got the same arcade sound that Pac-Man had. And he's actually eating dots, well, circles. The maze does seem a little bit off. I don't know what it is. It seems, I don't know, not so big. I guess because they made Pac-Man really big. But the ghosts are obviously, you could tell them apart. You can see I just ate the cherries there. I mean, yeah, this graphically is going to beat the Atari. As far as gameplay, though, I mean, I am using an Intellivision controller instead of using the Atari stick, which I find is not bad, but not good either. I think I liked using the joystick better. And the other thing I'm noticing is the exits. The exits on this one are over here. In the Atari, they were up and down. So they changed the... Obviously, they changed... I think what they were really trying to do is make this look like the arcade version. But, you know, a much simpler version. Much more widespread out. You know, the way the graphics work on the Intellivision. In fact, this almost kind of reminds me of playing Lock and Chase in a sense. Pretty decent, though. Doesn't seem as challenging. I don't know why. And that sound in the background, that little siren noise, that's in the arcade. So they really put a lot of work into this one to make sure that, you know, this was 1983, and it was on a system that had a much higher capability of you know, making the sounds and graphics properly. Probably didn't have a timeline on this one either, like the programmer for the Pac-Man game. I'm sure he was just given a... Oh, we got a nice little interlude, too. There's Super Pac-Man. I mean, this is actually pretty decent. I never knew this existed when I was a kid. I never had Pac-Man on the Intellivision. I didn't think that the Intellivision had Pac-Man. I thought that's why they had games like Lock and Chase, you know, and Mousetrap, because they didn't have a Pac-Man game, but obviously they do. And especially being made by Atari at the same time, you know. Their biggest competitor. or one of their biggest competitors. I would say the Atari and the ColecoVision. Whoops. Were probably their bigger, competitors of the day. So yeah, I mean, obviously this one could not compare to this one when you want to show graphics and sound and all that stuff. But that wasn't my intention. I just wanted to show the variances in what the options were that people had back in the day. And of course, a lot of people didn't have multiple systems. Like, some people would just have one system. They would have the Atari, or they would have the Intellivision. They're really expensive. I mean, I know today people have multiple systems, but we spend a ton of money on our entertainment today. But in those days, your parents usually had to scrimp and save to buy you one of those systems, and that was your system. Yeah, that was your go-to. You didn't have 15 different systems like people do today. But you have to respect that the programmer for this one had to work under tight deadlines, didn't have a whole lot to work off of. I mean, he obviously had the arcade, but you can't look at the arcade and say, make that work on the Atari back in the days when this would have been made. Today you can, because they have more time, they have more resources, they know the full capabilities of the system, they have easier tools to design and build these games, and like I was explaining, the tricks they had to do where he, pretty much split the screen, mirrored it, that type of idea, that's what they had to work with when they made these games. This one was quite surprising how well it's played and looked very close to like what the arcade would have looked like. And that's almost what you expect from the Intellivision. The Intellivision did have a better graphic capability and a better sound chip. So, I mean, it's kind of unfair to say, let's match the two, because they usually don't match up. Unless they make the Intellivision version mirror the or Atari version. But, I mean, that's, that to be said, this was also made by Atari. So, you had both games made by both the same company. Even the graphics on the labels almost look the same. I mean, the same kind of blockiness and stuff. The Pac-Man's obviously different. But I was quite surprised that this existed. It's not one that I had when I was a kid. So I played games like Lock and Chase, and that was my Pac-Man. So I didn't really have this. And when I saw that this actually existed, I had to have it. Now, as far as the Atari, I mean, there was a little redemption when they made this guy, Miss Pac-Man. And even Pac-Man Jr., which came out a little bit later too. These were actually, they spent some time on it. They got the game a little bit closer to what you would expect from Pac-Man. So even though this exists today, and you can still play it, I would recommend, if you're going to play some Atari Pac-Man, pick this one up. This one actually plays and feels like the real Pac-Man. Well, more Miss Pac-Man anyways. And the last thing I want to mention is that there is a Miss Pac-Man for the Intellivision, but it's a homebrew, and it's made by Carl Mueller Jr., the guy who made the Donkey Kong D2K version that I showed a video on before. And that also is pretty brilliant. I played it a little bit. I only have it on my computer, though. It's on my emulator. I don't have a physical cartridge for it, so I couldn't really bring it down and show you here. But, it's still a decent follow-up to the Pac-Man version on the Intellivision, and I would like to still fit in a video at some point where I show that game off. Anyways, hope you liked the video. I just wanted to show off a little bit of Pac-Man. I mean, Pac-Man is Pac-Man. Everybody knows who Pac-Man is. And these were your first options when you bought the original systems back in the day, and that was what you had, other than going to the arcade. Anyways, hope you subscribe to my channel. Talk to you later.